The United States is facing a significant shift in its economic landscape. On June 4, 2025, President Trump implemented a 50% tariff on imported steel and aluminum, affecting industries across the country. General Electric GE, a giant in American manufacturing, was forced to announce 12,000 job cuts and relocate some of its production overseas. On June 4, 2025, President Trump officially raised tariffs on steel and aluminum imports to 50%, effectively doubling the previous rate of 25%. The goal of these tariffs is to protect domestic steel and aluminum industries under the authority granted by Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. This section allows the president to impose tariffs when imports threaten national security. However, while the tariffs are designed to protect certain sectors, they have far-reaching consequences for industries that rely on imported steel and aluminum, such as the automotive and appliance sectors. In 2024, the U.S. imported 26.2 million tons of steel and 5.4 million tons of aluminum, making these tariffs an added financial burden for U.S. companies. Industry experts predict that the cost of consumer products such as cars, appliances, and office supplies will increase as a result. Consumers will ultimately bear the brunt of these price hikes. One of the most significant casualties of these new tariffs is General Electric GE. As one of America's iconic manufacturers, GE has seen substantial financial losses due to the tariffs. GE Aerospace alone has faced losses of approximately $500 million, with total losses estimated at over $1 billion when factoring in RTX Raytheon Technologies. In response, GE has been forced to cut costs and raise prices to make up for the shortfall, but the company is still projecting a profit for 2025. Despite these efforts, GE has decided to shift some of its operations outside of the U.S. to locations like Mexico, Eastern Europe, and Southeast Asia, where labor costs are lower. This strategy helps GE reduce production costs and stay competitive, but it comes at a heavy price for the American workforce. The company has announced 12,000 job cuts globally, with many of those positions being eliminated in the United States. The ripple effects of these new tariffs have been severe. According to analysis by Reuters, U.S. businesses and international companies have suffered losses exceeding $34 billion due to the trade disruptions. Major companies like Apple, Ford, and Sony have been forced to revise their profit forecasts, citing trade instability as a key factor. In addition to the financial impact, there is also a growing concern about the rising cost of consumer goods, which will inevitably lead to reduced purchasing power for American consumers. As the cost of everyday items increases, families will find it harder to make ends meet. But the consequences don't stop at the consumer level. The American workforce is also facing significant hardships. Many communities that rely on large manufacturers like GE are being hit hard by the closure of factories and the loss of jobs. As factories close, local economies begin to decline, and communities are left struggling with the loss of tax revenues, which impacts public services like schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. The cultural and social effects of these job losses cannot be underestimated. Communities that once thrived around manufacturing hubs are now facing not just economic hardship, but a deterioration in the fabric of their towns. These towns are losing more than just jobs, they are losing their identity and their stability. The shift in business strategy that GE has implemented is not unique. Other major companies like Honeywell and Caterpillar are also grappling with the realities of moving production overseas to countries with more favorable business conditions. This move underscores a larger trend in U.S. industry. America's industrial base is increasingly at risk. If the U.S. continues to implement policies that raise production costs and push companies to shift operations abroad, it risks losing its place as a manufacturing powerhouse in the global economy. The question remains, can tariffs truly protect American manufacturing, or will they just create more economic hardship for American consumers and workers?
Is President Trump on defense over the plunging and volatile economy? This story keeps kicking. America's largest companies are down, all of them in the market since the Trump tariff war began.
President Trump, a short time ago, telling Walmart that the company should, I'm quoting now, eat the cost.
Walmart reported its quarterly earnings, and it warned that price increases were coming later this month and into June. Walmart CFO John David Rainey told me that they just can't absorb all the price increase. They plan to absorb some of it, and they said they expect their suppliers to absorb some of those higher tariff costs.
42.9%. Yes, you heard that right. The price increase in just 1 week. For a Barbie doll, you think it's just a random occurrence? Think again, because behind that is a chain of crises quietly affecting the wallets of millions of Americans. Price shock from tariff policies. In 2025, new tariffs were introduced, reaching as high as 145% on certain goods imported from China. Later, the tariffs were reduced to 30% through a temporary agreement. But don't think it's over. The real impact? Not small at all. Walmart, the largest retailer in the U.S., immediately felt the consequences. About 60% of Walmart's products come from China, ranging from electronics, toys, to essential foods like bananas, avocados, coffee, and roses. And all these prices are rising. A clear example, the price of a Barbie doll at Target surged by 42.9% in the week of mid-April 2025. This figure comes from Telsey Advisory Group. Imagine, with such an increase, each American household would need to spend an extra $4,900 annually just to maintain their current standard of living. This data comes from a report by Yale Budget Lab. More than a shock. Supply chain crisis and desperate reactions. So, what did Walmart do to cope? They couldn't absorb the extra costs from the tariffs. The company asked its Chinese suppliers to lower prices. But the result? China refused. And so, the shortage of goods and price hikes became even worse. And it's not just Walmart. Target, Dollar Tree, other major retailers in the industry also had to raise prices. What happens next? The shortage of goods caused shelves to empty, and according to the National Retail Federation, NRF, customer satisfaction began to drop. So what will consumers do? They'll have to spend more because all goods are becoming more expensive. Canada seizing the opportunity and strategizing. While American retailers are struggling with this situation, Canada is quietly taking advantage of the opportunity. Major Canadian retail chains like Loblaws and Canadian Tire have started attracting American customers searching for cheaper alternatives. Amazon Canada, not to be left out, has expanded its warehouse network near the U.S. border. This is a smart move as U.S. consumers are looking for affordable and quick products. Research from Statista and the Canadian Retail Association show that shopping demand from the U.S. to Canada is rising sharply, and Canada is fully prepared to seize this opportunity. Canadian Tire shifted 18% of its orders from U.S. suppliers to European suppliers within just 2 months. Very smart. This helped them reduce reliance on the U.S. supply chain and maintain stable prices. Opportunity or challenge for Canada? Although Canada is seizing this opportunity very well, infrastructure issues remain a major barrier. Montreal's port, which is in the process of expanding, may not be able to meet the surge in demand from the U.S. The fact is that the expansion process will take about 2 to 3 more years to fully meet the demand. To cope, the Canadian government has implemented a loan support program for large businesses to help them maintain operations during tough times. But can Canada improve its infrastructure quickly enough? If not, these opportunities could slip away. $25 trillion US dollars, that's the economic scale of a new alliance led by China, representing around 25% of the world's population. Is this the beginning of a new order replacing the West, or just another temporary coalition? The 25 trillion bloc, when China comes knocking in Kuala Lumpur, not New York or Paris, China brought together ASEAN, the Gulf Cooperation Council, and itself into one giant economic bloc. We're talking about over 2 billion people, covering roughly 25% of the world's population and generating nearly a quarter of global GDP. This isn't a forecast, it's already happening. Signed, sealed, activated. And while Western media is still busy debating Fed rate hikes, a new world is quietly taking shape. Are we looking too hard in the rearview mirror while the road ahead is changing fast? Southeast Asia and the Gulf, the silent pivot, have you noticed? Vietnam, Indonesia, and Malaysia, once deeply linked to U.S. trade, are quietly pivoting toward China. Why? Not because of political tension, but because China offers more stability, fewer conditions, and faster execution. Just last year, ASEAN-China trade hit a staggering $982 billion. Meanwhile, Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait have pledged to boost trade with ASEAN to $180 billion by 2032. And Indonesia, a longtime U.S. military partner, now openly aligning with China's diplomatic stance. It might not make the front page of the New York Times, but it's happening. Quietly, steadily, undeniably. China's supply chain makeover, over $7 billion for the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed rail, that's not a promise. It's operational. And it's already moved 9 million passengers in just 1 year. The ASEAN Express, linking Malaysia to Chongqing, is now a core artery for cross-border trade. While Western debates rage on about whether AI will take our jobs, China's laying down the infrastructure to move goods faster than anyone expected. Ports, industrial zones, logistics hubs, all designed to bypass decades-old Western bottlenecks. No slogans, no drama, just containers moving and money flowing. Energy, tech, and the rise of the yuan. Did you know China produces 80% of the world's solar panels? Or that Huawei has already deployed 5G in Thailand? If you still think of China as just a factory for cheap goods, you're missing the bigger picture. They're now leading in AI, clean energy, and digital infrastructure. And the yuan? It's no longer just for Chinese wallets. Total Energies, a French company, recently completed its first gas trade in yuan. Saudi Arabia, now selling oil partially in yuan, breaking from exclusive reliance on the US dollar. Is this a quiet ripple or the first wave of a new financial order? Because once the currency changes, the balance of power often follows. A new order, not confrontation, but reconstruction. China isn't chasing headlines, it's building sustainability. From ACFTA 3.0 to RCEP, every move builds a self-sufficient, open, and politically neutral trade framework. ASEAN, with its young population and strategic location, is becoming the new global manufacturing hub. The world is no longer unipolar, and we no longer have to pick sides like it's the Cold War. This isn't a clash of civilizations. It's the rise of a parallel ecosystem. And if you still believe the global order is fixed in stone, maybe it's time to take a second look at the map. Because this shift isn't just about trade, it's about influence, stability, and long-term control. We're not just watching a new alliance, we're witnessing a redefinition of power. And the big question is, will the US adapt or get left behind?
Donald Trump has told a rally at a US steel plant in Pennsylvania that he intends to double US steel import tariffs to 50%. The president said the increase would offer the country's steel industry more security and vowed to stop any countries getting around the new rate.
We are going to be imposing a 25% increase. We're going to bring it from 25% to 50%, the tariffs on steel into the United States of America, which will even further secure the steel industry in the United States. Nobody's going to get around that.
Steel tariffs rise 50%. 5 U.S. giants halt lines, raise prices, cut production. Ready to discover why? Steel tariff policy and the unstable context. Did you know? The U.S. steel import tariff has surged to 50% in a short time. This major decision aims to protect the domestic steel industry from massive pressure by cheap imports. But has everything gone as planned? In reality, instead of stabilizing steel development, this tariff policy has thrown many big companies into turmoil, facing unprecedented difficulties. Not stopping there, the government has delayed imposing a 50% tariff on goods from the European Union due to stalled trade talks with no progress in sight. So, what do you think when a policy meant to be a shield protecting American industry turns into a double-edged sword? The instability and uncertainty in tariffs have created an extremely difficult environment for businesses. They can't plan production or predict how raw material costs will fluctuate in the near future. Many companies have started turning to more stable markets like Mexico, Vietnam, or Thailand to avoid risks and maintain operations. Tariffs are no longer just numbers. They are major barriers that make every production and investment plan tangled and uncertain. How long do you think this policy can last before its negative effects spread even further? Direct impact on major companies and consumers. Let's take a look at 5 American giants facing heavy pressure from tariffs. Walmart, the leading retailer, openly admits tariffs are squeezing profits. They've raised prices on everything, from essentials to electronics, while cutting thousands of orders and suspending contracts with some suppliers. General Motors and Ford, the automotive giants, withdrew financial forecasts due to unpredictable raw material costs. Ford halted some production lines. GM cut investment plans. Harley-Davidson, the iconic motorcycle maker, moved production to Thailand to avoid import tariffs as high as 60% in key markets. Caterpillar, a construction machinery leader, suffered a $350 million loss in one quarter due solely to tariffs. Their CEO is considering downsizing domestic production to survive. Nike raised prices by $2 to $10 per pair of shoes due to import tariffs from Vietnam, forcing cuts in promotional programs. With prices rising and products shrinking, how do you think American consumers will react going forward? Widespread impact on labor market and supply chains. Tariffs not only challenge businesses, but also directly affect workers and the national supply chain. Many factories have been forced to shut down or cut staff. Contracts are canceled, transportation activities shrink, supply chains break down, and prices keep rising. Do you know that those hardest hit are factory workers and small businesses who rely entirely on stable supply chains to make a living? A policy intended to protect the economy. But is it unintentionally sacrificing essential opportunities and rights of the labor market and consumers? Economic overview and an open question about the future. Tariffs are seen as a political weapon to boost domestic production, but what's the reality? They are causing deep and widespread damage to the U.S. economy. Many big companies are pulling out, not by choice, but to protect themselves from unpredictable policy shifts. Once factories and investments move abroad, is it easy for them to return? The answer is almost never. So, do you think this is the price America must pay for protectionist policies?
I've always worked to be very competitive from a pricing perspective and leveraging our strong portfolio. I'm very proud in this first quarter, we grew 2 points of market share. So we're going to continue to leverage our strong products across Cadillac, GMC, Buick, and Chevrolet, and we will be competitive in the marketplace. But right now, as we look going forward, we think the pricing environment is going to be much where it is right now.
General Motors is facing losses of up to $5 billion. And more than 50,000 jobs in the U.S. auto industry are at risk. But are tariffs really the main culprit? Tariffs, a double-edged sword, cutting deep into GM's costs. Tariffs of 25% slapped on imported auto parts were supposed to be a win for American jobs. Instead, GM is staring down a multi-billion-dollar loss. Take the Chevy Silverado, assembled on U.S. soil, yet burdened with an extra $3,200 to $3,600 in costs. These added costs forced GM to raise prices, putting pressure on consumers already juggling budgets. This ripple effect forces GM to rethink production, pricing, and competitiveness, all under the shadow of these hefty tariffs. Production disruptions, layoffs tied more to demand than tariffs. You might think tariffs alone are firing workers, but the reality is more nuanced. GM's factories, Factory Zero in Detroit, Cami Assembly in Canada, are slowing output, mainly because people aren't buying as many vehicles, especially electric ones. Despite nearly doubling EV sales to 31,000 units in early 2025, GM missed the 100,000 unit break-even target. This shortfall causes temporary layoffs. About 200 workers at Factory Zero, over 400 at Adient's Tennessee plant. While tariffs add pressure, it's the interplay of soft demand and company restructuring that's driving production changes. So it's not all tariff fault. It's a cocktail of market realities shaking the industry. Electric vehicles, green dreams collide with rising costs. The electric revolution promises a cleaner future, but the road is bumpy. Tariffs on key battery materials like lithium and cobalt have boosted Ultium battery costs by 10 to 15%. That's roughly an extra $1,200 per EV. Combine this with shrinking government tax credits, and suddenly GM's EVs get pricier and less competitive. The company's goal of selling 100,000 EVs to break even now looks distant, with projections closer to 65,000. This means GM is racing against rising production costs and softening incentives. Workers and unions, caught in a tug of war. The tariffs have stirred up tension among the workforce. Some workers rally behind protectionism, hoping tariffs shield their jobs. Others worry that rising costs and unpredictable hours mean less take-home pay. The United Auto Workers Union calls for defending American labor, but unions in Canada and elsewhere warn about fractured solidarity. This division isn't just about dollars, it's about trust, morale, and future bargaining power. Facing unstable schedules and shrinking paychecks, workers are caught between hope and frustration. How they navigate this struggle will shape labor negotiations, and maybe the very future of manufacturing in North America. Ripple effects. When one link breaks, the whole chain wobbles. GM isn't alone in feeling the squeeze. Other giants like Stellantis, Volvo, and Hyundai grapple with similar pressures. Supply chains, already delicate,